Hello, gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. Now, I know that a number of you lovely listeners out there quite enjoy the shorter tales of dread, which I must say we haven't had many of late. Happily, there is a very dear friend of the podcast who has been known to occasionally pop out a delicious little treasure of dark fiction, and we're going to share one of those with you this episode. But first, while we're on the topic of friends of the podcast, we have been recently joined by quite a flock of new friends who have chosen to subscribe to the Nocturnal Transmissions Patreon page and accept our friendly offering of exclusive subscriber episodes. These new fellow conspirators are Sarah Nielsen, Uncle Nobby, Ex-Chubby Bunny X, Eskel Black, and Melissa Boudreau. And as if our cup did not runneth over enough already with these fine new beloved acolytes, we've also been joined by not one, but two magnificent cohorts, our highest rank of supporter. These shiny new freshly minted cohorts are Daniel Clanton and Hisu. Welcome, Daniel and Hisu. Bless your black little hearts. All right, from new friends back to old friends. In particular, our old friend who has provided this episode's morsel of mayhem. It is writer, editor, publisher, and thoroughly diamond geezer, Ian Sputnik, one of our favorite humans. Ian is a UK-based wordsmith and horror enthusiast who has been there as a contributor, encourager, advisor, and friend to the Nocturnal Transmissions podcast since our very inception. He's a thoroughly good egg, gentle listener. So we're very excited to be sharing this recent offering from him with you. A tale that is currently featured on online publication Pen of the Damned, a collective of horror writers releasing fresh, spooky material weekly. And I believe it will also be appearing in Siren's Call e-zine, another provider of edgy fiction fixes. So, without further ado or heaping of praise and affection upon the poor Mr. Sputnik, Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present Blue Tip Down by Ian Sputnik. He awoke early, too early, yet had no idea why. But he would soon find out. His head was itchy. Not just itchy, it was on fire. He dug his fingernails in deep and scratched. God, it felt good, although it did nothing but offer temporary relief. Dave Driver felt like he was in a living hell. Even as he sat down in front of the TV with his morning cup of coffee, his attention was fixated on his head. It felt like 1,000 ants were crawling around inside his scalp. Being his day off, he decided to numb the pain with a rather large glass of whiskey. And then another. Eventually, the discomfort seemed to ebb away. He woke several hours later, but felt much worse. The itch on his head had spread to his eyes. He rubbed them until they were as red as stop signs, and still they stung and burned. Dave made his way to the bathroom to splash cool water onto his face. The relief again was only temporary, and the discomfort quickly returned. Only this time the tingling, itching, fire-laden feeling had spread to his nose and ears as well. He could hear a scraping, crawling sound. The volume was excruciating, but no matter how hard he held his hands to his ears, it only increased. Staring bleary-eyed into the mirror, he stepped away from the sink and immediately passed out. He couldn't tell if it had been minutes, hours, or days since he had fallen, but one thing was evident to him. He was completely blind. He gingerly touched his eyes. The sockets were encased in clumps of matted hair. As Dave screamed in repulsion, he realized the sound was muffled. Had he hit his head when he fell? He reached for his ears, only to feel long, thick hairs protruding from his auditory canals. Still on his knees, there was a wretched, gagging sensation crawling down his throat. His body, convulsed, tried to vomit up the intrusion, but the bile and contents of his stomach were stuck fast behind an impenetrable wall of hair that was working its way down his throat. After what seemed like an eternity of writhing and spasming in pure agony, he died. Dr. Sadler didn't hear the door open as the 2 police officers entered the room, followed by 2 other doctors from the facility. As they shook him awake, they were repelled by the stench of alcohol that enveloped him. He stared at them with upside-down eyes, then proceeded to vomit all over the lead investigator's shoes. Some time later, after he had sobered up enough to sit upright, the interview began. The detectives laid out all the facts of Mr. Driver's sad demise. They then inquired about the procedure Dr. Sadler had performed the day before, wanting to know every minute detail of the patient's hair transplant. Dr. Sadler cleared his throat and then confidently informed them that he had inserted each of the genetically modified hairs with the utmost precision and applied the growth agent at the required dosage of 1 ml per square inch of scalp. He proudly announced that he had managed to give Mr. Driver double the number of hairs per square inch most of his co-workers had the skill to deliver. This new genetically modified hair was even better than the older version, his arrogance proclaimed with a belch. "Blue tip down, white tip up," he boasted. "And then the patient will never be blue or down again." Drunken laughter punctuated his statement. Dr. Marigold, one of Sadler's co-workers who had sat in on the interview, put his hands to his mouth and gasped, "It's blue tip up on the new hair and 0.1 ml of solution. Please tell me you didn't." Dr. Sadler's shoulders slumped and his body fell forward. His head made an audible thump as it hit the table. He'd fallen into a drunken stupor. Again. Mrs. Driver put down the flowers that she had brought along to adorn her husband's grave. She gently laid them on the thick thatch of dark hair that continued to push its way up through the oak coffin and 6 feet of earth. She had heard the churchyard gardeners mumble and groan as she passed them. Apparently they were sick and tired of having to mow the Driver plot twice a week, when the surrounding grass only needed doing once or twice a month. At most. Blue Tip Down by Ian Sputnik. If Mr. Sputnik's jet-black sense of humor tickled your fancy, as it does ours, you can enjoy more of his work by digging up episodes 3, 8, and 69, in which he features. Look in the featured authors section on our website, nocturnaltransmissions.com.au, if you need directing. He's right at the top of page 1. Now, I know we have some A Voice from Darkness podcast fans out there amongst you. Happy news! A new episode is now available, or at least it will be at around the same time that this episode of Nocturnal Transmissions drops. Join Dr. Ryder as he regales you with a tale of sinister shadows in that seemingly most innocuous of locations, a public library. This episode contains a fun little treat for Jane Austen fans. So, if that isn't enough persuasion to convince you to put your pride and prejudice aside and embrace the sense and sensibility of the A Voice from Darkness podcast, well, I don't know what is. This episode was brought to you with the generous assistance of our Patreon subscribers. A particular thank you goes out to our esteemed cohorts: Tippy Polo, Andrew Cook, Fox Meets Bear, Sam Hankins, Philip Abruzese, Arnie Frank, Stephen Andrews, Wayne Prince, Joe Stinson, Rachel Brown, Adam Abaddon, J.B., Alicia Townsend, Alex Brewis, Sam Bell, Michael Wood, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Evan Dewley, and, of course, Daniel Clanton and Hisu. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle listener.